The night was cold and silent, broken only by the sound of weak coughing inside a broken hut. The walls cracked, the roof leaking, the air heavy with dust. Inside sat an alien widow with her small child. She held the boy close to her chest, her thin arms shaking as she tried to keep him warm, her eyes wide with fear. She had heard the stories, every alien had heard them. Humans were dangerous, humans were carnivores. They ate meat, and some said they even ate children. The widow had lost her husband in the war. She had lost her home when soldiers burned her village. Now she had nothing left except her son. Her heart beat fast whenever footsteps echoed outside. She prayed every day that no raider or stranger would find them. But that evening her fear grew stronger than ever because she saw him, a tall human moving slowly through the ruins of the colony, his eyes scanning, his boots heavy on the ground. She froze, holding her child tighter. The boy pressed his face against her chest, whispering, "Mother." "Who is that?" She could not answer. Her throat felt dry. She had seen humans from far away before, but never this close. His skin looked strange, his movements strong, his jaw sharp. In her mind, she could already see his teeth, sharp and hungry, she thought. Of the old rumors that humans bite and tear, that they feed on alien flesh. The human stopped near her hut. His head turned. He must have heard the cough. Her son coughed again, loud in the still night. The widow's heart dropped. She wanted to cover his mouth, but it was too late. The human had heard. He walked closer. The sound of his steps filled her with terror. She whispered prayers, wishing he would pass by, wishing he would not notice them, but the shadow of his body fell on the door. He stood there for a moment, not speaking, not moving, just looking. The widow could not breathe. Her child's small hand gripped her arm. She expected him to break the door, to drag them out, to eat. But instead, something else happened. The human bent down and placed something on the ground outside. Then he stepped back into the shadows. The widow did not move. Her heart raced. Minutes passed, then she crawled slowly to the doorway, careful not to be seen. She peered outside. On the ground lay food wrapped in cloth. Inside she saw dried fruits and bread. Her hands shook. She pulled back quickly. She thought this must be a trick. Poisoned food, a trap. Yet her child's eyes lit up at the sight. His stomach growled. "No," she whispered firmly. "We cannot touch it." But her child looked at her with hunger. His lips dry, his face pale, her heart broke. She pushed the food aside, refusing to believe it was kindness, she thought. Maybe the human is only feeding us to fatten us. Maybe he wants us alive now. But later, he will eat us. The night stretched long. The widow could not sleep. Her child whimpered beside her. She listened for the human's steps, but there was only silence. In the morning, she saw it again. More food left quietly at the door, this time with a small bundle of firewood. She stared at it in confusion. Fear tangled with doubt. Why would a predator bring warmth? Why would he bring bread instead of teeth? Her son reached for the toy he carried, a broken wooden figure of his father. He looked at her with soft eyes. "Mother, maybe he is not bad," he whispered. She shook her head. "You don't understand. He is human. He is dangerous." But even as she said it, her words felt weaker. Later that evening, she saw him again. From the crack in her wall, the human stood near the ruins. Watching the sky, he didn't look like a monster. He didn't show sharp teeth. His shoulders seemed heavy as if carrying burdens of his own. Still, her fear wrapped around her like chains. She could not trust, not yet. The child coughed harder that night, his little body shivering. The widow cried silently, holding him close, wishing her husband was still alive, wishing they had medicine, wishing she didn't have to choose between fear and hunger. In the darkness, she whispered to herself, "If the human is kind, why would he help us? What does he want from us?" Her heart had no answer, only doubt, only fear. As dawn approached, she looked again at the door. The food was still there, untouched. The firewood stacked neatly, the human nowhere in sight. She felt torn, her stomach empty, her son weaker. yet her fear strong. She thought of teeth, of claws, of stories told by the elders, but also of the quiet way he had left without harm. Her fear ruled her heart, but deep inside, a small crack opened, a question she did not want to ask. What if the stories were wrong? What if the human was not here to eat them? What if he was here to protect them? That thought scared her even more than the rumors, because if it was true, then she had wasted a chance, and her child's life depended on a choice she was too afraid to make. The widow held her son tighter as the morning sun broke through the broken roof, fear and doubt fighting in her chest. Outside, unseen, the human watched from a distance, waiting, silent, patient, while the widow wondered if the carnivore was truly a monster, or the only hope left for her child. The sun rose weakly over the ruined colony, its light slipping through the cracks of the broken hut. The alien widow sat beside her son, his face pale, his breath shallow. Outside the door, the food and firewood still lay untouched. The smell of bread drifted in the air, making her stomach twist. Her child stared at it with wide, hungry eyes. She shook her head again and whispered, "No, it is not safe." She feared the human's kindness was a trick. She thought of the old tales again. Humans were predators. They lured the weak before striking. But her son was too young to carry such fear. His voice soft. He said, "Mother, I am so hungry. Maybe it is not poison." His small fingers reached for her sleeve, pulling gently. Her heart ached. She wanted to give in, but fear was stronger. She pulled him close and whispered, "We cannot risk it." Still, the hunger was unbearable. Her son cried quietly. The sound cutting through her chest, she closed her eyes, feeling her strength break. That night, the human returned. She heard the steps. Her body stiffened. She peeked through the crack in the wall. The man came with another bundle of wood. He did not knock, did not speak. He just placed it carefully outside, his movements slow and calm, then he turned and walked away. The widow watched him fade into the shadows, confused. Why would a carnivore bring fire, she thought? Why waste food on us? She did not understand, yet her fear kept her. Inside, she stayed up all night listening for danger, but the human did not return. By morning, her son's cough worsened, his lips dry, his eyes heavy. She felt helpless. No medicine, no food, only fear. Then a sound shook her. Shouts from outside. She froze, pulling her son into her arms, voices cruel and harsh. They were raiders, aliens like her, but with no mercy. She peeked through the crack and saw them. 3 rough men with scarred faces. Weapons in their hands, they kicked through the ruins, searching for victims. Her heart raced. She held her child tighter, praying they would pass, but one of them laughed, pointing at the hut. "Widow, come out. We know you're inside." Her body turned cold. She whispered, "Stay quiet, my child." But the boy coughed again, too weak to hold it back. The raiders laughed louder. "Bring the child. He will fetch a good price." The widow's hands shook. She tried to block the door, her body trembling. The raiders moved closer, ready to break in. When suddenly another sound cut through the air. Heavy, footsteps, not theirs. The widow turned her eyes to the side, and her blood froze. It was the human. He stepped into the open, tall and strong, his face calm but his eyes sharp. The raiders stopped and sneered. "What's this? A human carnivore?" One spat. "Are you here to eat her first?" They laughed, pointing their weapons. The widow's fear doubled, she thought. Maybe this was the end. Maybe the human would prove the rumors true. But what happened next made her doubt everything. The human did not attack her. He raised his weapon, strange and metallic, not like theirs. He fired into the air. The sound thundered across the ruins. The raiders stumbled back, startled. The leader shouted, "Stay out of this, human!" But the man stepped forward, silent, his eyes cold. He fired again, closer this time. The ground exploded near their feet. Dust rising. The raiders cursed and backed away. One threw a rock, but the human did not flinch. His voice finally broke the silence, deep and steady. "Leave them." The widow held her son close, her mind spinning. This was not what she expected. The raiders cursed again, but their courage broke. They turned and ran into the ruins, their voices fading into the distance. Silence returned, heavy and strange. The widow sat frozen. Her chest, rising and falling fast, she stared at the door, expecting the human to come inside, expecting him to demand something, maybe even take her son. But instead, he bent down, picked up the food he had left, and placed it gently at her door again. This time he did not walk away immediately. He stayed a moment, his eyes looking at the broken hut, his face unreadable. Then he whispered words she barely understood. Safe now. And then he turned and left into the ruins, his figure fading. Once more, the widow's mind was chaos, her heart thumped against her ribs. She did not know what to believe anymore. The human had saved her from raiders. He had given food, he had given fire, and he had not asked for anything in return. Her son's small voice broke the silence, weak but clear. Mother, he helped us. She looked at the child, his eyes filled. With hope, her fear clashed with the truth she had just seen. She picked up the food slowly, her hands shaking. She sniffed it, it smelled normal. She broke off a piece, hesitated, then placed it near her lips. Her son's hungry gaze burned into her. Her tears fell as she gave him a piece. His small hands grabbed it, and for the first time in days he ate. The widow sat back against the wall, her mind torn, her heart confused. The human was not what she thought, yet fear still lingered. She whispered to herself, "Why? Why would he protect us?" Her son leaned against her, chewing weakly, whispering, "Maybe he is our friend." She did not answer. But in her heart, something shifted. Not trust, not yet, but the first crack in her wall of fear. The night passed quietly, and when the firewood burned warm, she could not stop thinking of the human who had saved them, wondering if the monster she feared was actually the only protector left in this ruined world. The night was heavy with silence after the raiders had run away. The widow sat close to her child, his small body pressed against her, her heart still beating fast, her mind replaying what had just happened. She had expected death. She had expected the human to harm them, but instead he had stood between her and the raiders like a shield. Her son was sleeping now, a faint smile on his weak face, crumbs of bread still on his lips. The firewood burned gently in the corner, warming their cold shelter, but the widow could not sleep. She kept staring at the doorway, half expecting the human to return, half afraid he would come in and take what he wanted. Yet the hours passed, and no one came. When morning light came, she looked outside carefully. The ruins were quiet. No sound of raiders, no sign of the human. Her hand still shook when she remembered the noise of his weapon. The way the ground exploded near the raiders' feet, she had never seen such power before. And she wondered, what kind of creature uses such force not for himself, but to protect others? The day passed slowly. Her child coughed less after eating, but his body was still weak. She gathered the cloth around him, whispering songs her husband used to sing. Tears burned her eyes. She wished he was here to see this strange human, to tell her what was right. That evening, she heard the footsteps. Again, her heart froze. She pulled her child close, but when she peeked through the crack, it was him, the human. He walked slowly, carrying something on his back. He looked tired, dust on his clothes, sweat on his forehead. He stopped in front of the hut and bent down, placing a small pot of water at the door. The widow stared in confusion. Water was more precious than gold in these ruins. She bit her lip, afraid to believe, afraid it was another trick. But then he did something that broke her walls even further. He sat down on the ground outside, not forcing his way in, not shouting, just sitting quietly, as if waiting. Her child stirred and peeked through the crack. His eyes lit up when he saw the pot. He whispered, "Mother," he brought water. She pulled him back, whispering, "Oh, stay away, it could be dangerous." But the child shook his head gently. "He saved us. He saved me." The widow's heart battled her fear. She wanted to believe her child, but her memories of the war were strong. Humans had been painted as monsters. They had been called carnivores, predators, creatures who could not be trusted. How could she now accept one as a protector? Outside, the human began to work with his hands, gathering stones, broken wood, tying them together. She watched silently, confused. What was he doing? Slowly she understood he was building. He was strengthening the broken walls of her hut. Every movement was calm, patient, careful. The widow's hands trembled. Her lips whispered. Why would he do this? She could not understand. Yet her eyes would not leave him. Her son leaned closer to the crack, whispering with awe. He is helping us, Mother. The hours passed, and when the sun set, the hut stood a little stronger, the walls patched, the roof less broken. The human wiped his forehead, stood up, and without looking inside, he walked away again, disappearing into the night. The widow sat in silence, her child tugged at her hand, smiling faintly. He is not bad. The words struck her heart. She wanted to deny them, to remind her son of the danger, but she could not because deep inside, she too had seen something different in the human's eyes, something that was not hunger, not cruelty, but something else. Protection. The next morning, when she stepped outside to gather the water pot, she saw something that made her stop. Beside the pot, on the ground, lay a small object, a toy carved, out of wood, rough but shaped like an animal. She gasped softly. Her son's eyes widened. He rushed forward, grabbing it with weak hands. Laughter burst from his lips. The widow froze, her chest tight. She had not heard her son laugh since before her husband died. She covered her mouth, tears falling. Her son clutched the toy and whispered, "The human made this for me." The widow did not know what to say. She could only watch her child's joy. Her heart heavy with conflict, she whispered to herself, "What kind of monster gives toys to children?" That night she sat awake, staring at the doorway, her son sleeping peacefully with the toy in. His arms, the human, had brought food, water, firewood, protection, and now even joy. Still her fear whispered in her ear, "Be careful. He is human. He will turn on you." But another voice, softer, asked, "What if he never does?" The stars shone faintly through the broken roof. The widow held her son close, her heart torn between the old stories and the new truth forming before her eyes. She knew she could not trust fully yet, but she also knew something had changed. The human was no longer just a shadow to fear. He was becoming something else, something dangerous, not because of his teeth, but because of what he was doing to her heart. He was breaking her fear, piece by piece. And deep down, though she would not admit it, a fragile seed of trust was beginning to grow. The morning came, slowly, light breaking through the cracks of the ruined hut. The widow woke to the sound of her son playing softly with the wooden toy, his small hands moving it across the dirt floor. His weak laughter filled the space. For a moment she closed her eyes, letting the sound sink into her heart. It felt like a dream. She opened her eyes and watched him, his face brighter than yesterday, his smile faint but real, and she whispered, "You sound like your father again." Her chest tightened, tears pressed at her eyes, but she wiped them away quickly. She could not show weakness, not when danger was still near. She looked at the door and wondered if the human would return. Part of her prayed he would not, for fear still lingered like a shadow. But another part of her waited because his presence had kept the raiders away. His food had given her child strength. His toy had made her son laugh, and those things she could not deny. By midday, she heard the familiar steps. Her heart jumped. She pulled her son close, but he wriggled free. Running to the crack in the wall to peek outside, he whispered excitedly, "Mother, he is here, the human is here." The widow stayed frozen for a moment before standing slowly, her legs shaking. She looked through the crack and saw him. The human was carrying wood again, but this time he did not place it at the door. Instead, he set it down in a pile and began to work, hammering, tying, stacking, his movements steady. He was building something larger, a proper shelter, not just repairing the old broken hut. The widow stepped back, confused. "Why?" she whispered to herself. "Why would he waste his strength on us?" Her son tugged at her arm, smiling. "Mother, can we help him?" She shook her head quickly, fear rising again. "No, we stay inside, it is safer." But hours passed, and the human kept working, sweat dripping down his face. Yet he did not complain. His hands were rough, but his movements careful, precise. He built walls, shaped a roof, stronger than anything she had seen since the war destroyed their village. At one point, he stopped and looked toward the hut, as if sensing her eyes on him. The widow froze, pressing herself against the wall, but he did not approach. He only gave a small nod, almost like a greeting, then turned back to his work. Her son giggled softly. "He saw us," he whispered. "He is not scary." The widow hushed him. Quiet. But her own heart felt strange. The nod had not been threatening, it had been respectful. By evening, the new shelter stood strong. Not complete, but safe enough to keep out the cold night wind. The human gathered his things and left without a word, disappearing into the ruins as always. The widow sat in silence, her child, staring at the new shelter with wide eyes. "Mother, he is protecting us," he said again. That night she thought of her husband, of the promises he once made to keep them safe, of the songs he sang to their son. She closed her eyes and remembered the day he was taken by soldiers. How helpless she felt. Now, strangely, she felt the same helplessness mixing with something new, something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. The next day, when the human returned, her fear was still strong, but something inside her shifted. Instead of hiding behind the wall, she stepped carefully to the door. Holding her son's hand, her legs shook, but she stayed. The human paused when he saw her, his eyes soft, not sharp. He raised his hand slowly, not in threat, but in greeting. The widow's throat was dry. Her child squeezed her hand, whispering, "Say something, mother." She hesitated, then whispered a single word in her own language. "Thank you." The human tilted his head, as if he understood, then gave another small nod. It was the first time she had spoken to him. The first crack in her wall of silence. After that, the human worked each day, and little by little the widow began to watch openly. Sometimes her child would wave at him. Sometimes he would carve small toys from wood and leave them at the door. The boy's laughter grew stronger. The widow's fear grew weaker, though not gone. One evening, the boy's toy broke in half. He cried softly, holding the pieces. The widow felt her heart twist, but then the human noticed. He came closer, crouched near the doorway, holding out his hand. The widow froze, but her son looked at her with pleading eyes. She hesitated, then slowly placed the broken toy in the human's hand. He studied it, pulled out a small tool from his pack, and with careful movements, fixed it, carving new edges, smoothing the cracks. When he handed it back, the boy gasped in delight, hugging the toy, laughing again. The widow stared at the human, her lips parted, her voice stuck in her throat. She wanted to speak, to ask why, but no words came. The human gave her a faint smile, then stood and walked back to his shelter. That night she could not sleep. She kept replaying the moment in her mind. Her fear still whispered, "Be careful. He is human." But her heart whispered louder, "He is not like the stories. He is not your enemy." She lay awake, staring at her son as he slept with the toy in his arms, realizing that trust was slowly taking root inside her, fragile and uncertain, but real. For the first time since the war, the widow felt something more than fear. She felt the beginning of trust, fragile as glass but shining in the dark ruins. The nights were warmer now, with the firewood burning in the corner, the new shelter stronger than the broken hut. Yet the widow's heart was not fully at peace. Her fear still whispered to her in the dark, reminding her of the old tales. But each day she watched the human bring food, water, and small toys for her son, and each day that fear grew a little weaker. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the ruins in red, her son coughed again, but this time the sound was deeper, harsher. She rushed to his side, touching his forehead. Her heart dropped. He was burning with fever, his skin hot, his breath shallow. Panic filled her chest. She tried to cool him with rags dipped in the little water they had, but nothing worked. Her son's lips trembled as he whispered, "Mother, I'm cold." Though his body was burning, she hugged him tight. tears streaming down her cheeks. Memories of her husband's last day returned, when sickness and wounds had taken him. She could not lose her son, too. That night, she cried softly, rocking him back and forth, whispering lullabies, but his cough grew worse, his small body shaking. She felt helpless. She had no medicine, no herbs, no healers. In her heart, she whispered bitterly, if the human wanted to eat us, now would be the time. He would not even need to fight. When morning came, she heard the familiar footsteps again. She wanted to stay silent, to hide, but her son whimpered, his weak cough echoing through the shelter. The human stopped at the door, his shadow falling across the floor. He did not speak, but when he saw the child's condition, his face changed. The widow panicked. She pulled her son close, shielding him with her arms. "No, don't take him," she cried, but the human did not move closer. Instead, he knelt down outside the doorway and carefully opened a pack he carried. He pulled out small bottles, strange packets, tools the widow had never seen. She froze, her heart racing, watching him pour something into a cup, mixing water with fine powder. Then he set it near the door and pushed it gently toward her. His eyes calm, his hands steady. He whispered only one word in broken alien tongue. "Medicine." The widow stared, her mind screaming no, but her son whimpered again. Reaching weakly toward the cup, her heart cracked. Fear fought with desperation. She whispered to herself, "What if it kills him? What if this is poison?" But then another voice in her heart spoke. "What if it saves him?" Her hands trembled as she lifted the cup. The liquid inside smelled bitter but not foul. She held it to her son's lips, his eyes half closed. He sipped slowly, his small body shivering, then fell asleep in her arms. The widow sat frozen, staring at the sleeping child, waiting for him to stop breathing, waiting for the poison to work. But minutes passed, then hours, and his breathing grew softer, steadier, his fever slowly easing. Tears ran down her face. She looked toward the doorway, but the human was still sitting there, not leaving, watching silently, guarding them. He did not enter. He did not demand. He only sat, as if making sure the child would live. The night stretched long, and the human stayed awake, feeding the fire, bringing cool cloths, wiping the boy's forehead gently. The widow could not stop watching him. Her fear clashed with gratitude until her heart felt torn in two. By dawn, her son stirred, his eyes opened wider than before, the fever broken. He whispered weakly, "Mother, I'm hungry." Her tears fell as she hugged him, kissing his forehead again and again. She whispered, "You are safe, my child. You are safe." She turned toward the door, the human still sitting there, exhaustion in his eyes, but relief too. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but her voice broke. All she could do was bow her head, the deepest sign of respect in her people's tradition. The human gave a small nod, then stood and walked away, leaving her stunned. He had saved her son's life, and again, he asked for nothing in return. That day, something inside her changed forever. Her fear, though still present, no longer ruled her heart. Gratitude had broken through, she whispered to her son as he played with the wooden toy. "I thought he was a monster, but he is more human than we are." The boy smiled, clutching his toy. "He is our protector," he said simply, his words pure and true. That night, when the human returned, the widow did not hide. She stood at the doorway with her son. She looked at him with steady eyes, fear still trembling deep inside, but stronger than fear now was trust, fragile but growing. She spoke again, 2 words this time. "Thank you." Her voice soft but clear. The human nodded slowly, his face calm, his eyes kind. Then he bent down and handed her a small packet of medicine, pressing it into her hands. The widow took it, holding it close, realizing that her son's life now rested in the hands of the one she once thought would eat them, the one who had instead become their guardian. And for the first time since the war, the widow felt something she thought she would never feel again, hope for tomorrow. The ruins were quiet for several days. The widow's son grew stronger, his cough lighter, his laughter returning. Each time he played with the wooden toy, The widow's heart softened a little more. She began to believe that maybe, just maybe, the human was not the monster she had feared, but peace never lasted long in the broken colony. Danger always came back, and it came in the form of the raiders. They had not forgotten her. They had not forgotten the human who had shamed them. They returned with more men, louder voices, sharper weapons, and crueler smiles. The widow was outside with her child when she first heard them, the crunch of boots on broken stone, the echo of laughter that carried no joy. She froze, pulling her boy close, her body shaking, her eyes darting around for the human, but he was nowhere in sight. The raiders stepped into view, 5 of them this time, their faces twisted with greed. The leader sneered, "The widow still lives, and her little one too, but this time, the human is not here to protect you." They laughed, circling closer. The widow's knees trembled. Her son clutched her hand, whispering, "Mother," his voice full of fear. She pushed him behind her, whispering back, "Stay close, don't let go." Her heart pounded. She felt trapped. She had no weapon, no strength, only desperation. The raiders moved in. Their leader raised his hand. "Take the child, the human can't be everywhere, and this time we'll make sure he never dares to interfere again." His men laughed, stepping forward, and then a voice broke the tension, deep and steady. "Leave them!" The raiders spun around, and there he was, the human, standing tall at the edge of the ruins, his weapon in hand, his eyes cold. The widow gasped in relief and fear all at once. Her heart torn, she had prayed for him, yet part of her still trembled at the thought of what he truly was. But when her son saw the human, his face lit up with hope. "He came back," the boy whispered. The raiders sneered. "There he is, the beast who plays at being a savior, but he's only one man and we are many." They raised their weapons, spreading out to surround him. But the human did not flinch. He stepped forward, each movement steady, each step echoing like thunder. The widow pulled her son behind a wall, whispering prayers, her eyes fixed on the scene, her heart beating so hard she thought it would break. The raiders attacked first, shouting as they charged, but the human moved like a storm. His weapon roared. Flashes of light cut through the air. The ground shook with each strike. One raider fell, then another. The others stumbled back in shock. The leader cursed. "He's just a man. Kill him." But the human kept fighting, his face calm, his movements precise. He shielded the widow and her child with his body, never letting a raider get close. Each time one tried, the human pushed them back with force like fire. The widow's breath caught, her fear shifting into awe. She had never seen such courage, such determination, and it was not for himself. It was for them. Every strike, every step, every shot was to protect her and her son. The raiders, now desperate, tried to retreat, but the human did not let them go easily. He drove them away, shouting, his voice sharp, "Never return." His final strike shattered the ground near their feet, sending them running into the shadows, their cries fading into the ruins. Silence fell, broken only by the widow's trembling breaths. Her son peeked from behind her, his eyes wide with wonder. "He saved us again," the boy whispered, his voice full of admiration. The widow stepped forward slowly, her legs weak, her eyes locked on the human. He stood there breathing heavily, dust on his face, sweat dripping, his weapon lowered. He turned to her, his eyes softer now, his voice quiet. "Safe." The widow's throat tightened. Tears filled her eyes. She wanted to speak, but words failed her. Instead, she bowed her head, deeper than before, her whole body trembling with gratitude. The human gave a small nod, then walked past her, checking the shelter, making sure no danger remained. His every action calm, protective. He asked for nothing, demanded nothing. He simply ensured they were safe. That night, the widow sat by the fire, her son sleeping peacefully against her, her heart full of emotions she could not name. She remembered how much she had feared him, how she had believed he would eat her child. Yet now he had fought, like a guardian, risking his life for them. She whispered into the night, "He is not a monster. He is a protector." The words felt strange on her tongue, but true in her heart. Her son stirred in his sleep, smiling, whispering softly, "He is family." Take two. Widow closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks for the first time in a long time. She no longer felt alone. She no longer felt abandoned. The human had driven away the darkness once again, and though her fear still whispered, her trust now spoke louder. The enemy had returned, but so had hope, and this time she knew hope would not leave her. Not as long as the human stood beside them. The ruins were quiet again after the raiders had fled. Smoke still hung in the air where the human's weapon had struck. The widow stood frozen with her son in her arms, staring at the tall figure who had fought like a storm. Her fear whispered faintly, but her heart shouted louder. He had saved them again, and not for the first time. Her son wriggled free from her arms and ran forward, his small feet tapping against the broken stones. "Wait," she whispered, reaching out to stop him, but the boy was too quick. He stopped in front of the human, looking up with wide eyes. "Thank you," he said in his small voice, clutching the wooden toy tightly in his hands. The human crouched down, his eyes softening. He reached out and gently patted the boy's head, his touch careful, almost afraid of hurting him. The widow's heart trembled as she watched. She had once feared these hands would tear her child apart. Now they were protecting him, comforting him. That evening, when the fire crackled in the new shelter, the widow sat with her son beside her, the human nearby repairing the walls once more. The silence was not heavy this time. It was calm, almost peaceful. The widow studied him quietly, his scars, his tired eyes, the way he worked. Without asking for anything in return, she wondered what pain he carried, what losses he had suffered. Her son tugged at her sleeve, whispering, "Mother, can I sit with him?" Her heart skipped, but she nodded slowly, watching as the boy walked over and sat near the human, showing him the toy, giggling softly when the man carved a new mark into it, turning it into a little animal with sharper ears. The widow smiled faintly, her eyes wet. She had not seen her child so happy since before the war, since before her husband's death. It felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Days passed, and slowly the three of them began to share moments together. The widow spoke a few more words each day, simple ones: water, food, safe. The human understood enough, answering with nods, small smiles, or broken words in her language. One night, when her son had fallen asleep by the fire, the widow looked at the human and finally asked the question that had lived in her chest for so long, her voice soft, trembling. "Why do you help us?" The human was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the flames, then he spoke slowly, his words broken but clear. "Lost. Family." His hand touched his chest, his face shadowed with pain. The widow's breath caught. She understood he too had lost. He too carried grief. Her eyes filled with tears, she whispered, "Me too," pointing to her heart. Husband, gone. For the first time, their grief connected. Two broken souls who had lost everything, sitting together in the ruins, protecting what little remained. The next morning, the widow stepped out of the shelter and did something she thought she would never do. She stood beside the human openly, her child holding her hand. She no longer hid behind walls or cracks. She no longer whispered from the shadows. She stood with him. The human looked at her with calm eyes, then at the boy, and gave a small nod as if to say, "We are together now." The days grew into weeks. Raiders came no more. Word must have spread that a human guarded the widow and her child. The ruins grew quieter, safer. The boy's laughter became a daily sound echoing through broken streets. One evening, as the stars shone above, the widow watched her son run around the fire, the human sitting nearby sharpening his tools. She felt something she thought she would never feel again. Not fear, not grief, but belonging. Her son suddenly stopped, running to the human. He hugged his leg and whispered, "You are family." The words were simple, innocent, but they struck the widow's heart deeply. She froze, watching the human. His eyes widened for a moment, then softened. He slowly placed his hand on the boy's shoulder, not pushing him away, not correcting him, only accepting. The widow's tears fell quietly. she whispered into the night. Yes, family, her voice trembling but true. From that day, something changed. The human was no longer just a protector, no longer a stranger who brought food and fire. He was part of their small, broken world, part of their survival, part of their healing. When she looked at him now, she no longer saw a carnivore to be feared. She saw a guardian, a friend, a man carrying scars like hers. And when he looked back at her, she thought she saw the same recognition in his eyes. The war had taken much from them both, but in its ashes, something new had been born. Not fear, not hunger, but trust. Fragile at first, now strong. The widow no longer whispered prayers of survival. She whispered thanks, not to the stars, but to the human who had given her child hope again. And as the fire burned warmly in their shelter, the widow finally leaned back, holding her son close, her eyes on the man who had once been her greatest fear, now her greatest protector. Her heart whispered a truth she could no longer deny. They were no longer alone, they were a new family, bound not by blood, but by trust, sacrifice, and the courage to see beyond fear.